Let's talk about the FEED Act, why people don't have enough to eat in the United States. I don't know how many of you even heard about the FEED Act, which is FEED. And it was actually part of the HEROES Act that never got off the ground. It's sort of dying on the vine over on the Senate leader Mitch McConnell's desk. But it was all centered around the idea, and it actually had bipartisan support. You had Tim Scott, you had Kamala Harris before she became vice presidential nominee, pushing for this FEED Act, which would basically reposition some of the money from FEMA and treat our food emergency in the United States the way it should be treated, which is an emergency, not as some casual thing that we just can throw some money at and hope that it helps. No, people without being able to go to school have become more than just food insecure. But I want to say something about the idea of food insecurity for a second. Let's stop calling this food insecurity. And let's start calling it actually what it actually is, which is a food emergency in the United States. We've got some decent jobs numbers, of course, for August, but make no mistake, right now we have 30 million people who are unemployed, and those unemployment checks have stopped coming, right? They're not getting the unemployment checks. They're not getting stimulus checks. They're being thrown out of their homes, and a lot of schools are going into this like hybrid model, and some aren't even reopening at all, which means that these school lunch programs that these children rely on are not there. Or if they're there, they're having to stop by and get a brown bag of lunch and take it home. How in the world in the United States are we able to buy billions of dollars in missiles and drones and gas masks and Humvees and things to blow up other people, but we can't provide food for our most needy Americans? Garbage. No one watching right now believes that. No one right now watching can say to me with a straight face, well, how do we pay for it? Yeah, I got an idea. Let's stop building missiles. Let's stop building Humvees that we send to foreign wars and send around the world. Let's stop building jet aircraft that we don't even use, that get sandbagged. They sit there getting dusty. Even John McCain, before he died, said, why are we building these? No one flies them. We're not using them. Why are we spending billions of dollars? Even President Trump agreed with him. He said, why are we wasting all this money? Of course, President Trump then increased military spending by 20%, and he wants a pat on the back from veterans. Great. What that actually does, though, is line the pockets of your corporate elites. That lines the pockets of these defense contractors. We're really helping the military. So we have a massive standing army in the United States, but we don't have food to feed our children. So, let's talk about these school lunches for a minute right now. I think a lot of folks don't necessarily realize that our school system is not just about educating our kids. Schools are places where people rely on getting a nutritious meal if they can. And we could talk all about whether the nutritional value of these school lunches in the United States is where it should be. God knows it's nowhere near the level of European countries for school lunches, where they get a fresh piece of fish, vegetables, locally sourced food. In the United States, we call pizza a vegetable. We call ketchup a vegetable. We give them French fries every day. It's not food, but at least it's something. At least it's something. And these schools provided it. So I think schools are going to continue to run into the struggle right now. They don't have the funding right now to provide all the meals, and the students who are not attending and those that are at home right now have to find ways to try to get to the school to get the food, or they just don't get it at all. Also, a very limiting type of food that's being provided. I mean, they're not giving them a hot lunch. And these schools, let me just say for a second, anyone watching who worked at one of these schools during the pandemic, you guys did an amazing job. You did an amazing job. You were closed, but you were out there every day in masks, handing out food to cars pulling up to get food from the school lunch program. And you were giving out this food to the American families for their kids, even with the pandemic in place and even with the school being closed. So thank you for doing that. You're amazing. And we should all be applauding you. But it's not your fault that what's in that bag is not necessarily like the most nutritious, healthy meal in the world. It's a sacked lunch, a sandwich, or something else. It's not necessarily going to drive the nutritional value of that, child up and help cut down on inflammation and diabetes and obesity and everything else that we have in this United States because of all the sugar and processed stuff in our foods. And of course, our federal government wants to save money by not providing fresh, healthy meals for our children at school lunches. Think about that. If they don't get that, this is one of the most important meals of the day for our children. And they're not getting maybe a nutritious meal at home. If they're at least getting it 30% of the time by being at school, that's 30% of the school lunch that the food that they're going to get is healthy, that they're able to get vegetables, they're able to get something healthy. But no, we're more concerned with mass production and cutting corners is the way that our federal government operates. So we've got some, these decent jobs numbers out right now. But right now, we're having to choose between buying medicine and buying food for our family. Listen to these numbers right now. The American people are being crushed with how much they're having to choose between buying medicine, doing other things for their family, and putting food on the table. The FEED Act was introduced in May, and it would have actually helped put restaurant kitchens to work feeding vulnerable Americans, including children who can't return to school. Now, there is some hope that we could separate the FEED Act out from the HEROES Act and pass it separately. There is bipartisan support for a food program for our children, for Americans right now who are struggling to be able to provide food for their family, the so-called food insecure, which I think, again, needs to be called a food emergency. And imagine instead of providing them with some crap food that's highly processed, which just furthers our obesity epidemic in this country, we actually provided locally sourced, locally created at local restaurants food that we could get out to the American families. Hot, delicious, nutritious food. Plant-based, with a piece of protein, vegetables, potatoes, rice, fresh greens, chicken, not processed, covered in bread, fish that's grilled, healthy, meats that are healthy, free of hormones and everything else. That's what the FEED Act would do. It would encourage restaurant kitchens to work feeding vulnerable Americans, including children who can't return to school. I want you to listen to Senator Kamala Harris. Now, this soundbite, I warn you, it may not be the quality that I'd like it to be. For some reason, the channel was coming through odd, so I apologize for that. But I want you to listen to Kamala Harris here. She talks about the way to make our communities safer and our neighborhoods safer is providing that kind of security for our families and the health and wellness of our family, where you don't have people turning to drugs, where you don't have people going out creating crime, because you have that health and wellness of the family, you have that education of the family. And I think this FEED Act, getting proper nutrition in the hands of our children, is incredibly important. Listen to her talk about the health and wellness of our communities.
What I believe now and what I believed then remains true and consistent, which is if you look at the communities that have no or very little police presence as compared to those who have a high degree of police presence, you will see stark differences. And one of them is this. If you go into any upper class suburb in America, you will not see police presence, but what you will see are well-funded public schools, high rates of home ownership, small businesses that have access to capital. You'll see families who have jobs where they don't have to worry about getting to the end of the month and feeding their children. And so if we want to create safe communities, one of the smartest ways we can do that is invest in the health of those communities, because healthy communities are safe communities.
With your hands.
Healthy communities are safer. Healthy communities are safer. Can we talk more about that? Healthy communities are safer. So the FEED Act, here's how it would work. It's called the FEMA Empowering Essential Deliveries Act. It would allow local and state governments to partner with restaurants on initiatives that feed people in need. It also calls on the Federal Emergency Management Agency to cover 100% of the cost. Now, remember, many of these most vulnerable kids are low-income kids who can't afford this food to begin with, or they rely on these school lunches. But the FEED Act, of course, stalled along with the rest of the stimulus, which is once again why we need to pass comprehensive stimulus, because no one's talking about this. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's been talking about food insecurity, and I know that Mike Pence has also been talking about it. I've heard Stephen Mnuchin talking about it, but this has not gotten a lot of attention, this FEED Act. So if we're going to do these little skinny bills, And you're going to start breaking things out, Congress. You're going to start doing these little piddly things. Pass the FEED Act. Tell them that you want this support. We'll have a link below. Call up your local congressman. Call up your member, your senator. Tell them you want your member of Congress to pass the FEED Act, FEED. So that way they could pass this separately. We need your support on this. The American people are suffering right now. I mean, the fact that they're having to turn to ramen noodles, like a highly processed, come on. Like, this is not eating a healthy meal if you're having to turn to that on a regular basis. Get fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, healthy meals for our kids in this country. Stop buying tanks. Stop buying jet aircraft that we don't need so we can blow up somebody in Afghanistan. This needs to change, and we can all do it together. So link below in this video. I want you to be able to call your local congressman and tell them you want a change on this. Tell them you want the FEED Act passed if they can't get these other stimulus plans through.